Hello and welcome to another edition of Kaleidoscope with another guest who I've known for a while now. And I'm really delighted to have him with us, Sandeep Bamzai. Thank you so much for sparing the time for your new book, which I
Happy to be here, Advaita.
and lovely to have you, which I wish I had more time to read like in more detail because it's such a well-researched book. Of course, I've known for years now that you've been working on this series of books.
5 years long.
Yes, yes. And one whole year, this was all you were doing.
Absolutely.
Which is a monumental decision for someone at, at your level in your career.
Yeah, to take a sabbatical while you're working is pretty much impossible. And
Yes.
that's the only way you can do it. There's no other way to do a book.
Especially at I think at your level when you were editing,
Yeah.
you were not kind of
as an editor,
middling kind of.
Yeah, as an editor, it's impossible to spare the time because this is a 24/7 job. More so the one that I'm in right now because it's a wire service, so it's impossible.
So we'll talk a little bit about that as well, about running a wire service and all of that. But let's first start with the book.
Okay.
Interesting choice of name, Princestan, because you say that it was quite possible that there would have been a Hindustan, a Pakistan, and a Princestan as well.
So, Hamidullah Khan, the Nawab of Bhopal, who is, according to me and the research that I've done, looking at all the papers and the deep dive into all the missives, the aid memoirs, the confidential documents, he appears to be the principal saboteur. As the Chancellor of the Chamber of Princes, he had that authority, and he was willfully engaged in this sabotage along with Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Lord Wavell, who was the viceroy at the time, Sir Conrad Corfield, who was the head of the sinister British political department, which looked at all the residents across all these states, these princely states. And then, of course, there was Churchill himself, who was the puppeteer and the man who was organizing this whole thing. So Princestan and Raj Asthan, which of course ultimately became a state in India as Rajasthan. But these were the two names that several of these princes, led by Hamidullah Khan, were looking at actively. And Princestan was definitely one of the names that was chosen by Hamidullah Khan and company, along with Rajasthan, Raj Asthan. So the idea obviously coming from the fact that the two dominions, as they would be constructed, would be Hindustan and Pakistan. So Princestan or Rajasthan, as per Plan Balkan, was what all these people were planning. This assemblage of people planned this Plan Balkan, which was looking at vivification of India, ensuring that, say, a Hyderabad, a Travancore, a Bhopal, a Kashmir, a Junagadh became like what East Pakistan was. Within the Union of India, these would be parts of Pakistan. And this was something which was completely unpalatable to Sardar Patel, Jawaharlal Nehru, and also, surprisingly and strangely, Lord Louis Mountbatten.
Yes, he was an ally. And very interesting, the dynamics between him and his political officer, who you've mentioned.
Yeah. So Mountbatten was completely opposed to Sir Conrad Corfield, and Nehru, of course, was used to fulminate the moment he would see Conrad Corfield. He would just be, ice cold to him. And there were some bitter exchanges between Nehru and Conrad Corfield, where Mountbatten was present. And Mountbatten, of course, was not very happy with him because he was constantly circumventing and going over Mountbatten to the Ministry of States in the United Kingdom. So Mountbatten knew this, and in fact, there's an episode where the plane that Mountbatten is taking to London to discuss his Dicky Bird plan with the Ministry of States, the same plane has come back with Conrad Corfield, who has preceded him to the United Kingdom with his whatever plan or etc., which he has delivered to the Ministry of State. So they were constantly at odds, and the fact that Nehru and Mountbatten were allies in this endeavor only helped them ultimately shaft Conrad Corfield. But there are enough instances right through the book which show the diabolical role that Conrad Corfield constantly played with every single premier princely state. Because let's understand, there were some duck ponds, and then there was a big 5 or 6 with huge land masses. Jammu and Kashmir was bigger than France on the day of its accession to India. Mysore was a very big princely state. Travancore was a large princely state. The Nizam of Hyderabad, of course, from Kolhapur right down to the coast, Hyderabad was the preeminent state.
His chapter is also very interesting.
He actually, Advaita, had managed to get himself the title of His Exalted Highness from the British. Can you imagine? So in the Darbar, the Royal Darbar, whenever it took place, 1921-22 also it took place, he was the preeminent Maharaja or the Raja as far as India was concerned.
He was very rich also, no? He was the richest.
True, and he was given a 21-gun salute, if you please, because of the size of his state, the money that was at his disposal, the income, etc., etc.
You know, and this is what I loved about the book was I was expecting it to be like this, very dense historical narrative. But I was delighted to find that you have a beautiful style of writing, of course. We're all familiar with that. We've read your columns for years. But, you brought that little bit of drama, intrigue. I mean, it was cinematic in many ways. I was reading it and I was like, oh, this could be a film. This could be a series.
No, thank you for those kind words, Advaita. But I deliberately did not want to make it dense, because if you're going to present history of that era of this magnitude through a book now, it'll have to be in a manner which is more contemporary as far as the reader is concerned. So perhaps the writing style had to be in sync with bringing that element across to the reader.
Absolutely. And because I've known how hard and how long you've researched this, I think part of it was my own expectation, wherein, I said, oh, it's going to be this huge tome and it's going to be complicated.
No, actually, the original manuscript, you're right, was very long. And it was Kapish Mehra at Rupa who said that, don't do this, don't make it a tome. And he actually asked me to condense it. And I think the way it has been condensed, and that also took some time, I think it really worked, because it's a much more smoother flow of narrative now. It was almost 450 pages, so which means more or less double the size of what I've actually presented this time.
But no, that's really what I want to tell viewers, that that the book is eminently accessible as well as very interestingly told, narrated. So you'll feel like you're transported to that era. And of course, it was a very, very complicated time in India's history, or rather modern India's history. But I mean, the games and the shadowing.
Totally. So when we talk about palace putsch and palace coups and whatever we imagine, all that was actually happening here.
Yeah.
So imagine the parliament as we know it now has this chamber of princes. And the British allowed these princes to meet in that chamber of princes. They were actually called the bastard child of the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. And they had the complete backing and support of the British Empire. And that is perhaps why they actually thought that they could get away scot-free. Because under paramountcy, the laws of paramountcy and the treaties that they had signed, they actually believed that whenever India was to become independent, it would be these two dominions, and we would be independent as well. It is only Mountbatten on July 25th, 1947, mind you, which is what, 5 and 15, D-Day minus 20, that he lashed out at these guys and told them that, please understand, there is no freedom here. One way or the other, all of you have to sign the standstill agreements. And one way or the other, all of you will be absorbed by India or Pakistan. That depends entirely on you, on whoever you sign the instrument of accession in favor of. So they till the end. And in fact, Hamidullah Khan actually breaks down, because he believes that Mountbatten has betrayed him, and Mountbatten has betrayed the princes, and the British Empire has betrayed them. This was the sense and sentiment of some of these princes, led by Hamadullah Khan. Of course, the
Was
Nawab.
he leading, or was he kind of the front guard of the Nizam?
No, two things.
Dynamics also that I found interesting.
Two things which worked in his favor. He was formally the Chancellor of the Chamber of Princes, so that gave him that authority. And moreover, Jinnah, Wavell, and Corfield were constantly egging him on. In fact, Jinnah actually promised him the Governor Generalship of Pakistan. Free and independent Pakistan, he promised him that if you do this for me, I will make you the Governor General of Pakistan, which never happened, of course, because he failed and Jinnah two-timed him and never made him the Governor General of Pakistan.
Which also brings me to the beginnings of the book. You mentioned your grandfather. And so tell us a little bit about these papers that he left for you.
So in 2006, when I left the Hindustan Times after many years, that was the first time I decided that I will look at these papers, which are trunks. They're like trunks, trunks, big trunks of paper. So what he did was, while he was the OSD to Panditji, he kept a copy, or he kept some of the papers.
So that your grandfather was the OSD to Panditji?
OSD, yeah. For 20 years, from 1944 to 1964 till Panditji died. So he worked with him. Of course, he worked subsequently with Shastriji also, and he worked with Mrs. Gandhi also till Mrs. Gandhi died in 1984. He worked non-stop with the Prime Minister of India for 40 years, from 44 to 84.
What was his name?
K.N. Bamzai, Kashinath Bamzai.
Oh, yes.
So he kept these papers, but he never ever spoke about them while he was alive, and he never mentioned what he did while he was alive. We knew from my father that he was somebody important in the government, and we knew from my father that he was very close to the Prime Minister of India, whoever the Prime Minister was at that time as we grew up. It is only after he died that when he left these papers, he bequeathed them to me, saying that you will do something with them. And it was my mission and goal. And I finally managed to look at them in 2006, when I wrote the first of what I believe is a trilogy on the actual accession story of J&K to the Union of India. That too was published by Rupa. But then it took me 15 more years, believe me, to do the second one, which finally came out last year. And I hope to do a third one from the same set of papers. But I can do 4, 5, 6, because there is so much material that.
So was he taking notes during this entire?
No, there are notes, but those notes are indecipherable. I can't make out his handwriting. It's centipedes versus millipedes. The handwriting is such. None of it makes any sense to me. What I have done is look at all those papers, corroborate all that information in the National Archives, in Nehru Memorial, and in ORF also, where I got a chance to do this. That is how I put it together. Notes, there are no notes.
And how is the process? Did you enjoy it? Was it?
It's an immersive thing. I'm not a student of history. I am an economics student.
Economics, yes.
Yeah. So for me, it was that much. But I tell you, whether when you decide to do something, you decide to do something. I just went headlong into these damn trunks, paper after paper, sifting through each and everything, reading them up, soaking them up, absorbing the information, then collating it, looking at what could be a story out of it. And while doing the first one, I realized that there was a lot of material on the princes. And when I saw that material, there were some letters. There was actually the original white paper that the Maharaja of Bikaner wrote to the Chamber of Princes, which actually broke the back of the Chamber of Princes because he drew a cleave within the Chamber of Princes with the Hindu princes aligning on one side and the Muslim princes aligning on the other side, backed as he was by the Maharaja of Patiala. And this was one of the seminal moments in that battle, because he said that we have to join the Indian National Congress and support them completely to create the Union of India. So it meant that all of them would allow democratization and reforms to take place in their princely states. And more importantly, they were to join the Constituent Assembly. So this white paper, when I found, I was like, and I checked, and this thing is the original, signed by the Maharaja of Bikaner. And then one paper after another, I have the original aid memoir of Mountbatten, which he writes to the government of India as they battle Kashmir in the United Nations. It's an aid memoir for the Foreign Office that please use these points, because when you argue on these points, you will ensure that you are ring fencing yourself. So all these papers, and some of it I have reproduced here. I think the white paper is here. The aid memoir is also here. Uh, all this led me to go deeper and deeper and deeper and look at more and more and more papers, and ultimately this is what has emerged from it.
This is quite these are like heirlooms. I mean, I'm sure
I would think so.
Love these papers, and
believe me, the National Archives don't have these papers.
It's incredible.
So some of these conversations, like the one that I'm having with you right now, with Shashi Tharoor and Jairam Ramesh and Kanchan Gupta, there was an idea that was spitballed from these conversations that we should actually look at the Freedom Archives. There is no real record of the independence movement in this country. I read the other day that I think there is a plan now as part of the Central Vista to create the Independence Archives. I hope that is taken forward, because I would imagine that there is a lot of such information and documentation which is available in private hands. Some of the princes will have an enormous amount of stuff. I have a zillion papers.
Would you donate them though? I think it would be very difficult to.
I would not, for the simple reason that I think that there is so much information, and if I was to just donate them and nobody was to look at them, there is so much of information that is not out in public domain. I mean, everybody who has read this, everybody who has browsed through it says that this is a part of history that we are not familiar with. People who have done their doctorates in contemporary Indian history say that we are not aware of this information. Even Frank Moraes or Sarvapalli Gopal, who were biographers of Nehru, have not taken this particular strand of thought and turned it into a volume, or they've simply ignored Nehru's contribution completely. Mind you, they've even ignored Mountbatten's contribution, and that's why I like to believe that it was a coordinated relay run. Nehru handing over the baton to Mountbatten, Mountbatten handing over the baton to Sardar Patel. And I think this ultimately is a tribute to all those invisible people, the nameless, faceless people who contributed not just to the freedom movement, but to the building of this India. Imagine there were only 18 provinces, but 565 princely states. If you take 565 princely states out in 1947, August 15, that is 100 million people.
Yes.
Living virtually in serfdom and penury. So imagine in India where Hyderabad is part of Pakistan, Junagadh is part of Pakistan, Travancore is part of Pakistan, Bhopal is part of Pakistan. So you'll have East Pakistans all over. Kashmir is not part of India. So that's why I think it was an important thing for me to do this, not just for the memory of my grandfather, but for people like V.P. Menon. You cannot ignore V.P. Menon's contribution, but he never got his due.
V.P. Menon, exactly. I mean, he was ready to retire, and Sardar Patel actually requested him to stay on and join him.
Absolutely, he was the only Indian on Mountbatten's staff. When Mountbatten arrived here in March, on March 23rd, 1947, he was the only Indian as part of Mountbatten's staff. The Viceroy's staff only had one prominently only had one Indian. It was Patel and Menon who did the reorganization, the correlate, the bringing together. All that was done systematically, and the way Menon himself has, traveled the length and breadth of this country to convince the princes, to talk to them individually. It's a contribution which has been ignored by history in this country. He has written 2 tomes on the integration of the Indian princes, but there is no drama in it. He's just written, And that's why I think it was respectfully to all these people to bring out that element of drama. That's why I decided I should do this, because even if it means staying on a sabbatical, it had to be done, because it's an important contribution, I think, to Indian history. And as you know, Indian history is completely left leaning. Indian history has been written with a particular mindset and a thought process, and despite it having been written in that manner, I'm surprised that Nehru's contribution has been ignored completely.
But from what I was reading in the book, was Nehru temperamentally suited to speaking to the princess? I feel this was
No.
something that only Patel could have achieved.
There are passages in the book which
Yes.
show the princess going to Patel and telling
Yes.
him, please, इससे बात मत करवाइए.
Ah.
हम आपसे बात करने को तैयार हैं. ये इनसे बात करने जाते हैं, ये तो भगा देते हैं, चिल्लाते हैं.
Yes.
So please understand Panditji's mindset. He was completely anti-monarchical, maybe because of his Fabian socialist thinking.
That was Nehru.
Yeah, he was completely anti-monarchical, and he was besotted with this idea that these princes are the scum and these princes have to be taken down. Right through, you will find there are elements which support that. But when it came to crucial negotiations, he was not a negotiator.
No,
So I'll just
temperamentally, I don't think he was.
No, he was not. I'll just read a short passage. I'll just read a short passage from the book which says, Sardar Patel didn't brook much interference in his work at integrating the princely states. Most believed he was ruthless. And though the idea of an integrated India emanated from Nehru, who wanted the princes and their fiefdoms dismantled, it was Sardar who showed the steel, resolve, and spine after independence. And it isn't as if Nehru took a backseat after 15th August 1947 in this regard. But at every twist and turn, it is Patel and Menon who then go after the princes systematically, corral them, bring them to heel, and bring them on board. And of course, there's support coming from people like I said, the Maharaj of Bikaner and the Maharaj of Patiala, because this instrumentality that the Brits had left, called the Chamber of Princes, this was all they did was subterfuge, chickenry. Their game, this was their game. And this was done, I'm sure, knowing the Brits, this was done with deliberate intent.
Of course.
And it was done so that you would delay the process. But Mountbatten was like a decolonizer in a hurry. He just wanted to close everything and move on, which is what he did. Yeah. Because if you know, Advaita, the original independence date is June 30th, 1948. He abbreviated that and made it August 14 and 15.
For which he's got flack as well as.
Of course.
I mean, he's sort of had to face both sides of the sword.
And it is said that Advaita was never comfortable coming to India, and she was constantly telling Louis Mountbatten that let's get out of here as quickly as possible.
she was that expat wife.
Yes.
Yes. Which it was very hard, which actually brings me to Nehru. And, because you have mentioned this a number of times in the book about his attitude towards monarchy, and, he had a real problem with that type of autocratic regime. What do you think he would have, I know it's a political question, but what do you think he would have thought of the fact that his family is dynastic?
Political royalty.
Yes, his political royalty and has
but
been.
I'll tell you one thing. From my understanding, I was born much later. Actually, I was born when Nehru passed away. So I wouldn't know about Nehru personally. But from whatever my father has told us, from whatever interface my grandfather had with him on a daily basis, I don't think Nehru would be happy with something like a dynasty.
I don't think so either, because whatever I've read of him,
I don't think so.
I don't think
because he was in many ways an iconoclast, a literator. I think he should have been given the Nobel Prize for Literature for writing Discovery of India. The fact that he spent 10 years of his life in jail, virtually between 1939 and 45, most of the Congress leadership was parked in Ahmednagar Fort, including him, Patel, Gandhiji, everybody. So here is a man whose upbringing is completely British. So he's an Anglophile. He's a barrister at law. He's completely anti-monarchical. His thinking is predicated on what Annie Besant, George Bernard Shaw, and people like that have, taught him, or what he's learned from them. So I personally, I mean, he must be there somewhere looking at what's happening to the Congress party, etc. But I personally don't think he would have been somebody who would be very happy with the fact that there is a dynasty in his name. No.
And I think, a lot of his achievements, of course, he's also got a lot of credit being the first prime minister of India and all of that. But I think a lot of the defiling to a certain extent of his legacy has also been a consequence of, this dynastic kind of.
I actually believe, Advaita, that the dynasty has roiled his stature and his work. The dynasty has actually roiled his stature and his work. Because if you look at Nehru in isolation, the work that he has done in the freedom movement, the fact that he was prime minister, and people say that he was effete and weak. I again discount that. I'll tell you, if Sheikh Abdullah was his friend, if he tried his damnedest to make sure that Sheikh Abdullah became the prime minister of Jammu and Kashmir, then it is the same Nehru who decided to send him to jail. It is the same Nehru who decided that if Sheikh Abdullah is anti-national, if Sheikh Abdullah is plotting against the Union of India, then you should incarcerate him. And between 1953, when he sent him to jail, and 1975, when his own daughter resurrected Sheikh Abdullah and signed the Indira Sheikh Accord, for 22 years, he was in hibernation, estivation, depending on the season. So this was supposedly his best friend.
Best friend, yeah. Yeah.
And I think look at
ruthlessness also.
Ruthlessness. Now people say he was, he didn't have the gumption to fight the debacle against China. What happened in Goa? He did exactly what Sardar Patel did in Hyderabad. It was called police action in Hyderabad. He too did the same thing. He surrounded Goa. And please understand, Goa was a Portuguese colony. Portugal was a member of the United Nations. There was enormous criticism of Nehru when he was planning to take over Goa, but he did so. Patel was not there. Sardar Sahib died in 1950.
Yes, yes.
So there is a lot of contradiction in this man's thinking, thought process, character, stature, and I don't think people have actually captured the real story of Nehru. Yeah. But I'll tell you, as far as princes are concerned, if he was a Fabian socialist, I think the incarceration, the brutal incarceration that he has in Naba in 1923, it actually convinces him that these princes have to be taken down, because Motilal Nehru actually has to go and rescue him. It is that bad. He is, he's put in a stable, a horse stable.
But Nehru was also an elite. I mean, he was also of
course.
His home, for example, when you read about them pre-Gandhi, was very Western. Was
but Advaita,
and glass and crystal and sitting at the table and all of those things, which didn't really happen in India.
But Gandhiji was also a barrister at law.
Correct.
Sardar Patel was also a barrister at law. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was also a barrister at law. So the four principles of the freedom movement were all Anglophiles. They all studied in England. Of course, Nehru's education started in England much earlier. But whether it is Patel or whether it is Gandhiji or whether it is Jinnah, they were all...
Gandhiji was an NRI of sorts,
He was, because he spent 17 years, I think, of his life in South Africa. Jan Smuts, who is virtually the dictator of South Africa, actually with folded hands tells him, please leave, because what he managed to do in India, he would have certainly done in South Africa much earlier. So these are very complicated people, and I don't think in any nation such an assemblage of people has come together at the same time. I mean, think Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Man besotted with Pakistan actually creates a nation which is ideologically and completely a Muslim nation, an Islamic nation. He
And he
creates
was
it
a
out of
religious
and he creates it out of India. And he was a sick man. He kept
man.
that as the best secret. So imagine if India had waited, he would have died.
Yes.
There
See,
would have been no partition.
that is sort of blamed on Nehru's personal ambition.
Yes.
He was so keen to be the prime minister that he didn't want to wait.
There are two specific instances which I would like to highlight again. One, the day Mahatma Gandhi died, Jan 30th, 1948, which is now Martyrs' Day. Before his assassination, both, it is said, and this is recorded in different places, both Nehru and Patel visited Gandhiji in Birla House. And the differences which had erupted between them were such that they were not working together and they were not looking at working together.
It was also a little unfair to Patel, right? He won fair and square. He won the election. He was elected as the president. And then kind of came in and gave in to Panditji's sort of petulance
But
almost.
the same thing happens, Advaita, many years earlier in Haripura and Tirupuri, where Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose defeats Gandhiji's candidate Pattavi Raman, and Gandhiji is hugely upset that this man from Bengal has landed and become the Congress president. And then he's treated badly, he falls ill, he comes on a cart, and it is Sarat Bose, Subhash Chandra Bose's brother, who writes. Is it Sarat Bose? Well, his brother, Netaji's brother, writes a nasty letter, which I have incidentally as part of my archives. That letter is nasty. He writes a dirty, nasty letter to Gandhiji saying that you deliberately tried to sabotage the election of my brother.
But Netaji then moved away from the Congress. No,
because two things happened.
Two things
happened because of the behavior of the Congress, particularly the behavior of Gandhiji and Patel. He then goes back to Bengal, where he's stripped of all his authority, and then he creates the Forward Bloc.
Yes.
His own party. So it is Netaji also was treated extremely badly by Gandhiji. And in fact, this entire process of anti-monarchy and anti-princes, Gandhiji virtually till Haripura refuses to let Nehru attack these princes because he believes in the concept of trusteeship. He believes that the princes represent they're trustees of the god. Yeah, they're trustees of the god. So Nehru very smartly creates an organization called the All India States People's Conference, which is basically a stalking horse of the Congress party, which goes deeper and deeper into these states so that there is democratization and reforms taking place. This organization is actually the key thing as far as bringing the princes to heel is concerned. So he has his own man, Dwarkanath Kachru there. He has Sheikh Abdullah as the vice president. And Gandhiji refuses. It is only in Haripura, I think, where Netaji then supports Nehru, saying that India, you cannot have an India without the princes. You cannot have an India where there are just provinces. You have to have the princes as well. So this is a long and arduous journey as far as Nehru is concerned to make sure that it is Mountbatten who actually acts as a catalyst and galvanizes the whole thing. And then, of course, Patel, because Patel, in a conversation with Mountbatten, which is again documented, says, will you give me the whole basket of apples? So this is the conversation between Mountbatten and Patel. Patel says, will you give me the whole basket of apples? Referring to the 565 princes. And Mountbatten says jocularly that suppose I don't give you 4 or 5. Patel says I want them all 565. And he gets all 560. So imagine there is a duck pond like Patodi. There are small little, riyasats, which were essentially riyasats, small little 2 kilometer by 4 kilometer and maybe even smaller. But they were all princes, nawabs, and what have you. And they were all part of this chamber of princes. And they had that authority because they believed that they had linkages to the Brits because of these treaties and the law of paramountcy. But when Mountbatten, Nehru, and Patel decided that they have to go, they went.
In fact, in your book also, when you mentioned Nelson Mandela, it reminds me of what he said, that he
Yes,
said that your Gandhi is your role
yes,
model, and
yes,
he said, no, actually, it's Nehru.
yes, yes. So I'm saying that I don't think the figure of Nehru has been understood by very many people, including his biographers. Because, for instance, his own biographers have ignored this fact that he went to Naba, went to jail there. He went to Faridkot and attacked the Raja of Faridkot openly. Then he went to Kashmir, where he was jailed again in a guest
Hmm.
house in
He
Domel.
was not permitted inside there, no?
He was not permitted. So Maharaja Hari Singh's guards did not allow him to enter Kashmir, and he was jailed in Domel. In fact, there was an attack on Nehru, where one of the JNK infantry or whatever it was called at that time, the royal guards of the Maharaja, one of them actually tried to attack Nehru. And it is Kachru and my grandfather who came to save him at that particular point in time, because my grandfather and Kachru both were present at that
Hmm.
point. So
Hmm.
that was the association and affinity that my grandfather had for this man, and I think there were a whole lot of people at that time who were completely besotted by Nehru,
Oh,
and
yeah. I
that's
mean, it's,
that's why there are so many Jawaharlals, including my own father, who was named Jawaharlal by my grandfather, on because he was so close to Nehru. So I think this is a testimonial to all those people, in my own small way, because I'm not a historian, but I'm attempting. This is the second time that I've attempted to write on history. There
no,
are
when
other
you
books.
mentioned Kashmir also, then the second Sarsang Chalak also played a very key role.
Oh yes, that.
Guruji Govalkar, which is another contribution which is not spoken of.
And again I checked this with the Sun itself,
Hmm.
because there's an element of mystery about this. See, the way it works is there is a sequence of events that takes place.
There's a
Nehru,
there's a date he arrived,
yes,
which
yes, yes. There is
it's all
Nehru, after he was jailed in Domel, decides that he will not go to Kashmir.
Hmm.
So the Congress president of that time, J.B. Kriplani, is sent to Kashmir. The Maharaja virtually refuses to meet him and says that, who are you? Huh?
Hmm.
This is followed by Mountbatten, Viceroy of India,
Hmm.
visiting Kashmir. And the Maharaja disdainfully says, I've got colic. I'm sorry, you go and fish.
Yes.
I will not meet you. So 5 days he refuses to meet him. Mountbatten comes back unhappy. Mahatma Gandhi then visits Kashmir. The Maharaja refuses to meet him. It is Maharani Tara Devi who convinces Hari Singh that this is not an ordinary man. This is Mahatma Gandhi. Please meet him. Finally, that meeting takes place in his garden, in the palace garden. Gandhiji says something to him, but again, Maharaja is not convinced. Patel, it is said, then convinces Guru Golwalkar that he should visit Kashmir. Guru
Correct.
Golwalkar, I have pointed this out, Guru Golwalkar goes on August 12, which is 3 days before independence of India, and talks to Maharaja Hari Singh. I have spoken to Karan Singh, his son, Dr. Karan Singh, his son, and he says, I remember Kriplani, I remember Gandhiji, I remember Mountbatten, I remember this bearded gentleman who came to visit my father. I don't know what transpired, but you're right, he visited me.
No, he did. He did. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a
And
history.
and he
I
played a
checked with the Sarsang Chalak. I checked with the present Sarsang Chalak, and he said that yes, this is a fact. It happened. And mind you, the raiders then came down the road, Muzaffarabad Road. They burnt the power station in Mahura. This man Hari Singh is still not convinced. Finally, in the dead of the night, he gets into his car and drives down from Srinagar to Jammu, along with his friend Victor Rosenthal and his entire cavalcade of Rani, Karan Singh, servants, retinue, whatever jewels, etc. they could pack, they come down. But Till October 26th, he vacillates. He does not sign the instrument of accession. It is then finally VP Menon and Manik Shaw and others who visit him in Jammu and not in Srinagar, and they get the letter of accession.
Yes, I mean, this is, of course, he was refusing to meet anybody. And that's when Guruji Govalkar was kind of...
So Guruji has obviously said something to him which is not in public domain. Guruji has spoken to him and told him, and from what I gathered, from what my documents tell me, is that he told him, you're a Hindu Raja of a Muslim Praja. Okay. And as a Hindu Raja, it is your stated objective that you should come to our side, which is India.
And I mean, even today in present day Sangh, there is a lot of this thing for Kashmir to a large extent, and it being an integral part of India, which is what we all feel actually.
But imagine, we are told repeatedly about the story of Kashmir. We are not told the story about Hyderabad or Bhopal or Travancore.
And that's why in your book, I found Hyderabad very interesting.
So here was a despot, a complete despot, who believed in himself and nothing else.
Yeah.
And to bring him around, and this police action goes into 1948. Kashmir finally agreed on October 26, 47, and then the war broke out. But while that war was being fought, and Nehru was involved in whatever, it is Patel who moves in and virtually surrounds Hyderabad and captures Hyderabad. And mind you, of the other princely states, Junagadh actually has a referendum, and 97% of the people actually sign for India. So we get so how should I put it? So this Kashmir narrative takes up so much of our mind space that we forget that there were other bigger princely states which till the end, Jodhpur for instance, the Maharaja was convinced that he should go to Pakistan for some strange reason. And there is this delightful anecdote where, he produces a gun. I don't know whether you read that part. So, I mean, why would Jodhpur, I'm just saying, Jodhpur would be naturally inclined to come towards this side and not that side.
Exactly.
These princes have their own foibles, their own idiosyncrasies, their own, strange.
And we have to remember that this was all one country.
Oh, so yes.
Not have been that out of the ordinary to say.
No, I think that there is a small chapter. I didn't want to take too much time, but there is a chapter called Darbari Oligarchs, where I've tried to explain that, the foibles in the Alwar held orthodox religious beliefs which were manifested in his refusal to sit on leather and the silk gloves he wore lest his fingers brushed against anything unclean. So there are these I've captured.
This is the detailing in the book which just...
Bhupinder Singh of Patiala was known to eat 25 quail at a sitting, and even on the day of his death consumed a 10-egg omelette. Because he was a huge man. The Nizam believed in excess, even by the standards of the rulers of the Indian states, when on one occasion he decided to count his pearls. Buckets and buckets of pearls of all shapes and sizes were poured through grading machines that were normally used to grade gravel and then laid out to dry, uncovered on the roof of a sprawling palace. And I just want to add one thing here. When we say Chamber of Princes, these guys would come here and they would sit in the parliament where this chamber was. Look at the construct of the central vista even today. There is a Hyderabad house.
That's right.
There is a Bikaner house. There is a Patiala. The Patiala court complex is the Maharaja of Patiala's house. Jamnagar house. All the Nawabs and princes were given key residences. I mean, Hyderabad house is virtually a small palace.
Yes.
Even today. The Patiala court complex, which was basically the Maharaja of Patiala's residence in Delhi, is also a huge thing. Jamnagar house is huge. Bikaner house is huge. So all that is around the central vista is essentially Raja, Maharajas, princes, Nawabs, and their homes in Delhi when they would come here and sit in the chamber of princes and spitball on how to stay outside the ambit of India.
But can you imagine how angry or they must feel today that, their legacies have sort of been usurped?
And I think
His dynasty kind of has become the modern
and I
day.
think even till such time as they were being given privy purses, they must have been relatively happy. But when the privy purses were also taken away from them, then I think that left them, and that's why they had to move. Move out of their palaces, turn them into hotels or whatever. For survival, they would have done. They would have done all that. But the key here is the excesses. It's not that there was a small principality. There was a small principality called Aund. This Maharaja was, he was the benefactor of everybody. He believed in democracy. He believed in reforms. He was very close to Gandhiji, and whatever Gandhiji told him, he did. So all of them were not. Bikaner, Sir Sadul Singh, I think, was the Maharaja of Bikaner, or Sir Ganga Singh and Sir Sadul Singh. They built the canal. They did whatever they could for the people of their princely state. So it's not that everybody was a Rottweiler, but for most part, a lot were.
But thank you so much. It's been a delightful conversation. And I just think this book is terrific. It's
Thank you.
It's so much fun, and you must look at a screen adaptation. I think.
No, I agree with you. It could work out as a web series, yes.
It could definitely work out as a web series with such a colorful cast.
Yes, absolutely.
So thanks so much. And I'm really looking forward to the next book. And thank you.